Tell me that horror story. Worst financial model you've ever seen or had to work with?
Several years back, I was working with a pretty high-profile client, and I got to a final presentation in front of the business owner, and then he was like, "This is wrong." It wasn't necessarily wrong, it was just way outdated. The embarrassment of building something that I thought was right, that somebody else who'd never seen it before knows that it's wrong, that was perhaps one of the more traumatic horror stories of my whole career.
What was your key takeaway from that experience?
Always check your work, and this is perhaps the most important, I think, mindset. Always try to think about where you're trying to go.
So when you're going into an underperforming company, when it comes to modeling, how do you go in and do an assessment?
It often does start with cash flow, and then it just opens up this Pandora's box of these other problems.
If you could share one piece of advice with our audience to be a better financial modeler, what would it be?
Well, that's important to think about it, and I would say to anybody who's listening to this is...
Welcome to Financial Modeler's Corner, where we discuss the art and science of financial modeling with your host, Paul Barnhurst. Financial Modeler's Corner is sponsored by Financial Modeling Institute.
Welcome to Financial Modeler's Corner. I am your host, Paul Barnhurst. This is a podcast where we talk all about the art and science of financial modeling with distinguished financial modelers from around the globe. The Financial Modeler's Corner podcast is brought to you by the Financial Modeling Institute. FMI offers the most respected accreditations in financial modeling. And that is why I completed the Advanced Financial Modeler earlier this year. I'm thrilled to welcome Carl Seidman to the show. Carl, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Paul. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you again. Carl's been on my FP&A shows before, but this is the first time we get to talk a little more technical modeling, if you want to call it that. And so Carl runs his own business, Seidman Financial. He worked in consulting, has an accounting degree, so he's given a TED Talk, and he's just a really smart guy. Did I miss anything?
No, that's about all I have.
All right. So first question I'm going to ask. We give everybody this one. Tell me that horror story. Worst financial model you've ever seen or had to work with?
Well, I think that goes in a couple of ways. One is the worst financial model I've ever seen from somebody else, and then another one, maybe the worst I've ever created.
You can go either way. It's up to you. We get a lot of both.
I'll give maybe an answer here from my own perspective of one of the worst that I ever created. And this is one that I share often, just the horror story of it, is I was working with a pretty high-profile client several years back. I mean, quite some time ago. And I didn't really know the best ways to go about building recurring, enduring, flexible models where new data is going to be coming in. I always assumed that, I just have to spend hours and hours updating formulas and updating ranges so that I get all the most recent information in. But I remember I was bringing a bunch of new data in month after month and thinking everything was fine and that my analysis was reflecting all of this new information. And I got to a final presentation in front of the business owner and put that financial presentation in front of him, and he was like, "This is wrong." And I was like, "No, it's not." He was like, "Yeah, it is. It's wrong." And I mean, this was in the first few minutes. And I was like, "No, this is your data." He's like, "Maybe it is, but it's wrong." And I said, "Okay, well, let me go through the presentation and then I'll go back, check my numbers." And he was right. The model was in fact wrong. And I had just not thought of more effective ways to create flexible ranges and lookups. And I had presented a deliverable that it wasn't necessarily wrong. It was just way outdated. Right? So it was like several months out of date, and he was the one who caught it. So it was just the embarrassment of building something that I thought was right, that somebody else who'd never seen it before knows that it's wrong. That was perhaps one of the more traumatic horror stories of my whole career.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've had to be like that where you make a mistake, somebody looks at it and they call it out immediately. I had one where I spent this time on a model, totally new idea. So I really didn't know how to build it, made my best assumptions. I'm in front of my boss, the CFO, and he's like, "This model looks like it's good enough for government work," which was not a compliment from him.
Yeah.
So you think about this, and just, kind of shredded it. And I had to go back and rebuild it. Yeah, it wasn't one of my finer moments. I can relate. I think we've all been there in different ways.
Yeah, and I think that the expectations are different from the person who's actually building it. and the person who might be using it or collaborating with you. So, we use that statement too of good enough for government work is, you know what, it's at par or it's just subpar.
Yeah,
Maybe good
exactly.
enough to get by, but for what we're trying to do, it's just not that good. And sometimes you don't necessarily know what good is until you see what somebody else's work looks like, and it gives you an impression of what you didn't know.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think that's been the most valuable things over the last few years as I started to really see different ways people model. I never had taken a modeling course. I just, you figured it out as you went. And I finally had one role where I worked with someone who'd been in investment banking, had built a ton of models and a boss. My modeling became much better. And then now doing this. And it's amazing when you start to learn from good examples and really see how flexible, how dynamic a model can be. You're like, wow, somebody told me what I made back then was good. What were they talking about?
Yeah, for sure.
What was your key takeaway from that experience? If you had to list kind of one takeaway, what would it have been?
I'm going to give you 1.5 takeaways. So
Sure.
one, always check your work.
Do what you want.
Always check your work, right? So don't trust that you've done it the right way. But 2, always try to, and this is perhaps the most important, I think, mindset that anybody can have is always try to think about where you're trying to go. Before you start to build, always trying to think about what are you trying to do? Where are you trying to go? What might this need to be a few months from now? And the reason why I say that is that oftentimes, Paul, if you came to me with some mandate, I would say, okay, I'm going to get that across the finish line and then I'm done. But if I'm not thinking about what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, what you might be asking for a few months down the road, that's going to give me a very different framework than Carl, I just need you to get this done in the next couple of days. And so to me, it's always been, since that moment, that was probably, 15 years ago. From that moment going forward, it's almost always about asking these clarifying questions of, Paul, I understand what you're trying to do, but how does this fit into what you're trying to do in the long term? Or, what's the business going through right now that I should be thinking about that maybe I'm not thinking about as you've just asked me to do this project? So long-term thinking, like long-term strategic thinking of where does this thing need to go is the biggest lesson of all.
It's funny that I think that kind of gives back to a little bit of what we talked about in FP&A, one of the most important skills, that ability to anticipate, right? You're thinking long-term. Where could this go? What could they need? Yes, you can also ask them, but some of it is also your experience being able to say, I'm pretty sure this is where it's going to go. I'll make it flexible enough to manage that. Because sometimes they don't even know where it's going to go. You just know they're going to come back and ask more questions.
That's right. And thinking about that, it might just be an answer of, I need to make this thing flexible, or I need to be open-minded about this, or I don't want to, put a bow on this right now because it's going to evolve. Just that anticipation of where things might go or that things might change is super important.
Agreed. All right. So this next question is to have a little bit of fun, because you provided a unique answer on Calendly when I asked what I should know about this interview. You're having it look like you don't remember this.
I don't remember.
Well, I asked the question. It says, when you schedule the meeting, one of the questions we asked on the forum was to share anything that would help prepare us for this meeting. You provided a one-word response. Do you know what that word was?
I don't.
Donuts.
Oh, okay.
You care to elaborate on that? Let the audience in on this little secret of ours?
Yeah, I don't even know how this little inside joke started. I really don't even remember.
I think you told on LinkedIn the story when you were in high school.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
How you worked in a donut place. And then I did a LinkedIn post where I listed all the people that came up on my feed that are like you.
Okay.
And I put the word donuts on. I said lover of donuts on it.
Right.
I think we've kind of gone back and forth since then.
Yeah, so where that all started from, so when I was 13 years old, turning 14, my parents lived just down the street, walking distance from a cider mill. And that cider mill was just very well known, very famous, extremely popular in the area. And people would go take their kids and get cider and donuts. And my very first job when I turned 14, my dad was like, go get a job. And I was like, where am I supposed to go get a job? I don't have a car. He's like, where can you walk to? And so it was either a choice of going to work at the cider mill. I think there was maybe a market a little bit further down the road. But I was like, okay, I guess I'll go there. And I went there and they were like, the only thing that we would ever hire you for is being a donut bagger. So we would put you in the basement with like the sweltering hot steam and lard. And it was not the most enjoyable experience. And yet friends and family members are like, oh, you get to be around all those delicious, apple cinnamon donuts. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, you must love those. And I was like, no, I won't eat them. And I didn't eat them for like 20 years after I got that job. So it was just kind of always been this running joke of, oh, these delicious donuts, and I wouldn't eat them for like decades. But now, I've gotten over that donut trauma, maybe perhaps the same way that I got over the lack of dynamic data trauma. You learn your lessons, you move on, and you embrace the next chapter of your life. So I'm back to enjoying donuts again.
Well, good. I'm glad you're enjoying donuts, and thanks for sharing that story. I laughed when I looked at that. I saw that on there, and I'm like, all right, how can I have fun with this? All right, we'll go back to our regularly scheduled program, so to speak, here. Well, one of the things you've worked with a lot, and I'd love to know why. I think some of it has to do with your consulting days, but I know you have a lot of experience. You've done some degrees in the restructuring, underperforming type companies, those that are in danger of going under. Why has that area interested you, or how did you kind of develop a specialty in having worked with a lot of businesses in that area?
Sure. It started as a total fluke, but then it became something so much more. I started my career at PwC, but on the advisory side, on the consulting side. And it was a wonderful environment to be in. I learned so much, was surrounded by some of the smartest people ever. But then we hit the recession time back in 2007, 2008. And like so many other places, the economic upheaval just caused a lot of challenges. The work was not coming in, the quality of work was not as good, and I started to just not feel as thrilled about the work that I was doing. So I said, well, what's going to be busy in a recession? And it's not really something that I think your average finance, accounting, business person is going to say, because they're going to say, oh, the market's shrinking, all jobs are going to be gone. I better, really put my nose down and work hard. But I was like, well, what's going to be really busy when times are bad? Turnaround, restructuring, distressed business consulting, bankruptcy. And so it was around that time that I started to say, well, that's going to be busy right now, even though everything else is going to start to dry up. I'm going to go in that direction. So I started to do interviews at a handful of the turnaround, restructuring, bankruptcy advisory firms. Took the one that I thought was the best fit for me, and it was a boutique. So part of the interest that I had in working in a boutique is, rather than be on a engagement with 50 people, it was me and one person, or
Sure.
me and two people, or just myself. And so I just got thrown into the deep end. And I sometimes used to make this analogy of it. It's like getting thrown into the deep end. You don't know how to swim. You have no life preserver. And by the way, the water is on fire because there's an oil slick on the top. So you better figure it out.
You're saying that's a bad situation to be in.
That would seemingly be a bad situation. But the silver lining of it is you have no choice but to learn how to swim and put out that fire. And so while a lot of people failed in that environment where they're like, there's just not the kind of support, there's not the kind of recipe that I just need to follow. And my colleagues were like, there is no recipe. You just have to figure this out. And so I remember going through that experience, and the very beginning was so uncomfortable, where it was like, there's no answers. There's no guidance. Like, you just have to figure it out. But then after months and years of doing it, I started to embrace that ambiguity, that uncertainty, that, kind of like managed chaos. And to say chaos, when I came out of PwC, I was within the umbrella of crisis management. So I was doing disputes. I was doing forensic fraud investigation. So everything was just always chaos all the time. And I kind of thrived in that environment. But then what I started to realize, Paul, was that when you're working with a business that's in distress or in chaos, it's not remarkably different than a business that's doing well. It's the same skills. It's the same kind of support. It's just a totally different context of this business is failing, that business is doing fine. You're going to apply the same kind of advisory services, similar types of modeling, albeit not saying, how do we wind the company down? But it's, okay, we have to do cash flow because we're running out of cash. But then when I started my consulting business, I started working with these aggressively growing businesses doing cash flow. Why? Because they're growing so much, they might run out of cash and they need to do some fundraising. And so, again, a lot of the skills were very similar. I love getting my teeth sharpened in that distressed environment. I think if I had done it the other way around, it would have been a lot more difficult. But getting the background in the chaos allowed me to address chaotic environments as well as normal environments, as well as aggressively growing environments.
That explains a lot. Chaotic environments. I got it. Yeah, I could totally relate to what you're saying. I've worked in some environments where, when things are challenging, it often becomes more chaotic. Not that we are in risk of restructure, going bankrupt, that we needed to restructure, but we were a heavy debt from an LBO. We were combining 50 different companies trying to make it all one operational company, and what you usually do in a 3-year period in 18 months with the private equity. And it was just constant chaos, but the same framework, same things applied. It wasn't all that different than other jobs I had been at. It was just more intense.
Right. And I totally agree with that point, is you don't have to have a business that's failing. It's just difficult decisions that need to be made. People with different opinions that cannot agree. Some heavy investment opportunities where there could be some major consequences if we get it wrong. So again, it doesn't have to be a company that's about to fail. Every company goes through challenges, disagreements, risk, uncertainty. And I think that skill set, both on the modeling side as well as in the mindset side, is indispensable.
Totally agree with you. So one of the things I noticed you earned, and I'm not familiar with this at all, so I'd love to learn a little bit about it. You did the Certified Insolvency and Restructuring Advisor program. So kind of what did that consist of? How did that help you in working with these type of companies?
Yeah, so in the environment of turnaround and restructuring, at least when I got that credential many years back, there were two main credentials. One was the Certified Turnaround Professional, or the CTP, that was facilitated by the Turnaround Management Association. And then there was the Certified Insolvency and Restructuring Advisor, which was done by the American Institute of Restructuring Advisors. I think that was the name of the organization. And what was very tricky in that time was, and it still exists now, is it's such a specialized part of business consulting.
Yep.
That it's like, you don't go to college or grad school to learn how to do a bankruptcy. You don't go to college or grad school to learn how to liquidate a company or how to turn around a company. And so in the lack of education that was out there, just in terms of formal educational institutions, if you're finding yourself in that kind of a situation, you're having to get thrown into the deep end without a life preserver, without having to know how to swim, and an oil slick on the surface where the water's on fire. And so what these two organizations really did was they said, well, let's put that education into this space. Let's teach these people how to do this better. And it's really in the service of everyone. So for you, Paul, if you were to get the CIRA, you say, well, now I'm going to get more acclimated and familiar with insolvency, restructuring, bankruptcy, understanding the signals, understanding the plan of reorganization, understanding what the whole bankruptcy process is about. That's going to help you. But then it's also clearly going to help your clients, because your clients are going to say, oh, we've got Paul who's got this background in this education versus, and I'm not saying this to be offensive in any way, of Paul, he's a really good modeler, but he doesn't have experience in distress situations.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And so it gives just that extra layer of, it's not the feather in the cap of, oh, you got a certification, wonderful. It's more of, you've just gone through a very comprehensive education and training over many months to say, now you know how to do this. Oh, and by the way, in the process, you're sitting beside 35 peers who are not at your company, but are at peer companies. And these people can become part of your network. There was a young woman who I met, I think in the second part of that certification. I still keep in touch with her, 15, 20 years later. So even though, people love the certification, it's more really about the education and the network that you get.
Oh, like MBA schools, I tell people, if you're going to go to school full time, no, it's about the network. You can get the same education in evening or a lesser known school. So it's about name and network. That's really what I came to realize. I remember when I applied to all the grad schools, I'm like, wow, this really is a business. As they're competing for you and different things. I'd never experienced it like that. Didn't realize. And then, you go to grad school, like, okay, I get this similar type thing.
Yeah, and especially with education now being largely digital, I mean, you can take that from home, but the value, I think, and maybe this is a little old school, is I think the value is going in person and meeting people and hearing their war stories too. So it helps enrich your experience, your familiarity, and helps you build your network.
Yeah, no, when I'm telling people comparing different programs all the time, I say this one is a cohort style. It's not in person, but you're going to build more of a network. This is just you study and take the test. Now, what's going to work better for you? Not one's not necessarily better than the other, but there are benefits. I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, there's some real value in having that network, because where do we turn when we need help? We generally turn to our network. Next time I need to know about donuts or restructuring, I'll turn to Carl.
Depends, not apple cider donuts.
All right, fine. Not apple cider, but others. All right. So when you're going into an underperforming company, when it comes to modeling, are you typically starting with cash flow? I'm assuming that's one of the big issues. Or how do you go in and do an assessment? And what's typically how you think about when you're modeling? Is there an area you typically start with?
It depends on who's bringing me in. So in my work 20 years ago, the way that turnaround, restructuring, bankruptcy work works in larger companies and more complex environments is oftentimes there was a breach of a bank covenant, or there's a default on a loan, or something really went wrong. And it wasn't, I hate to say this, it's actually not the company that's sounding the alarm. It's the bank, or it's a private equity firm.
It's somebody who wants their money out.
It's somebody who has some skin in the game, and they say, I don't like what's going on. I need your help. And so that would sometimes dictate what the path of the engagement would need to look like. If it's a bank, I have to represent the bank. If it's an investor, I have to represent the interests of the investor.
Sure.
Now, do recognize that, in a pie, you have slices, and if the pie gets smaller, all of those slices also get smaller, but you also just need to think about who's hiring you, who are you reporting to? Since that time, since I started my business over a decade ago, I rarely get brought in by a bank. I am getting brought in either by a private equity firm or an investor, or the company itself. And what makes, I think, this a lot more fun is when the company says, we're in some trouble. Paul, they know what their trouble is. And it's not a bank saying, we don't know what's going on. We don't know why this is happening. We need you to go in and figure it out. The company says, we are eroding profit. We don't have the cash. We need some help. People are leaving. We need your help. So what this ended up doing, which I thought was pretty neat, I didn't realize it early on, was when I went from formal turnaround, restructuring, and bankruptcy work in a firm to starting my own business, a lot of these businesses were not like, we just need a finance guy to do cash flow. It was like, we need a really smart business operator who knows operations, finance, sales, procurement, everything. And so I came in, and even though the term was not really fractional CFO back then, my clients would call me an executive coach. They would say, yeah, we need you to come in and help run our finance function. Oh, yeah, but while you're at it, we need you with sales forecasting. Oh, yeah, well, while you're at it, we need you to have discussions with the bank. Oh, yeah, while you're at it, we need you to help with purchasing. And so, Paul, what it often starts with is we have pain. We know we have pain. We don't know how to deal with it. It often does start with cash flow. But then once you put together a cash flow, it's not like, all right, here's the cash flow. We're done. Hand it off and you have a model. It's, well, the cash flow is problematic because of this and this and this and this and this. The cash flow almost becomes a barometer of all of these other driving issues. And then it just opens up this Pandora's box of these other problems. And then to fix the cash flow, it's not a wave a magic wand and change some numbers around. It's how do we improve sales? How do we improve margin? How do we get better terms? How do we, I hate to say it, lay some people off? So all of it comes into play, but it often starts with an analysis of cash flow.
FP&A guy here. And as you know, I am very passionate about financial modeling and the Financial Modeling Institute's mission. I have been a huge fan of the FMI for years, and I was super excited when they decided to sponsor the Financial Modelers Corner. I recently completed the Advanced Financial Modeler certification and loved the entire experience. It was top-notch from start to finish. I am a better modeler today for having completed the certification. I strongly believe every modeler needs to demonstrate they are a qualified financial modeler. And one of the best ways to do that is through the FMI's program. Earning the accreditation will demonstrate to your current and future employers that you are serious about financial modeling. What are you waiting for? Visit www.fminstitute.com/podcast and use code podcast to save 15% when you enroll in an accreditation today. Sure, you're looking at the cash saying, okay, if we don't change something, we run out in 6 months. What are the levers we have? Where's the issues? And then I would imagine talking to people to really understand the operations to see what can be done. Because yeah, you could see an issue on the piece of paper. Okay, well, revenue, we don't have enough revenue, or spending too much on COGS, or we have headcounts upside down, whatever it might be. But then to understand why, you usually need to know the operations and dig into the business and talk to people. The spreadsheet is going to alert you to problems, but it's not going to help you with that, as I like to say, the kind of the so what and now what. It just tells you the what. Okay, well, I got a house on fire. How do I put it out?
Yeah, that's very true. And where some advisors come to me and they say, I had a call yesterday, quite literally on my way to the airport yesterday. And this is a fractional CFO I've had a relationship with for a year. And he's like, Carl, I've never done the work that I'm being asked to do. What do I do? And I'm like, well, you have to ask yourself some questions. I would say, do you have to know the ins and outs of everything that you're doing in order to say yes and move forward? Can you learn how to do it if the answer to that is yes? But here's the thing, Paul, and this is really uncomfortable for lots of people. I know a lot, but there's a whole lot more that I do not know. And
you know enough to know you don't know.
What we have to be able to do is to know where our blind spots are and know how to ask really smart questions of the people who are smarter than we are. And so, Paul, you know certain industries that I probably know nothing about. But I can go into a company and say, all right, the cash flow is showing me these kinds of problems. I might not have familiarity with this industry, but I can ask you the intelligent questions, and you can help give me the answers. So oftentimes think about finance as we are coordinators, we are facilitators. We are not necessarily the end-all, be-all expert of everything that we might ever need to touch. I don't think that that's possible.
No, I would fully agree with you. It's not. I mean, yeah, is it great when you know the business well? Sure. Does it help? Of course. And you do need to get to know some things, but you got to rely on experts. It's as much as knowing about asking the right questions and being curious. Because like you said, none of us know everything. It's like, let's take Excel. Somebody tells me they know everything about Excel, I'm not listening to them. Like, because I just know they're full of it. I'll give you an example. You'll laugh at this. I had an interview with a candidate for a job, and I asked them to rank how good they are at Excel, and then we dig into it. It's like, I'm a 10. And I go, well, explain to me why you're 10. He goes through and I'm like, have you ever heard of this formula? No. Have you ever heard of this formula? No. Do you know about dynamic? Or this is when they first come out. No. Go, would you like to change your answer? And he looked at me very begrudgingly and goes, fine, I'll change it to a 9. Like, all right. It's clear this guy is not humble at all. Like,
I would have felt really bad, Paul, if he was like, you're right, I'm a 2. You put me in my place.
Well, then I would have been like, all right, good. I know not to hire you. Yeah. He said, I'm a 9. And he actually, it's funny. I had one other person interview him. They're like, probably do the job well, but do you really want to work with somebody that's that arrogant, was the comment back to me. And I'm like, no.
Well, I tell you what, Paul, if you ask me, I wouldn't tell you I'm a 10. Because I sometimes will go through, groups that I'm with, I'll go through like a whole listing of things. And I'm like, I have no idea what any of these things do. So, there's always a gap.
I see some of the stuff on LinkedIn and I'm like, I don't know if you've ever seen like Jeremy Early and some of those guys that they're doing programming, right? They have these super long answers with like take and scan and map and lambda. And I'm like, all right, I'm out. I don't even know where to start on that thing. And you're going to walk me through it. So
it's a spectrum. It's an array. I guess pun intended. It's an array.
Well done. Good pun. Speaking of arrays, we've talked a little bit about cash flow modeling. You recently ran a webinar talking about building dynamic cash flows using dynamic arrays. What do you see as the benefits of that in cash flow modeling? Kind of how did you end up deciding to have a course or at least a webinar on that?
Well, how much time do we have, Paul? No, all the joking aside. I mean, so what's been interesting is a number of years back, as you and I and many both know, is dynamic arrays came out. And the question that I first had when it came out was, well, what are these? What do they do? And to me, it's one thing to understand what the Excel functionality is, But then it's something totally different to say, how does this apply within the context of my work or the work of people who I'm partnering with? And so I remember when they first came out, and it was like, big deal. Okay, this is interesting, but I don't see the use cases. And one of the use cases that I first saw, just from like a data and Excel standpoint, was on the unique function. And I was like, oh, this is a game changer, because I've been doing all kinds of goofy workarounds that are not good workarounds. So that was helpful. But then I was like, well, wait a second. The more that I start working with these, I started to bring them into my consulting engagements. And I was like, wait a second. And Paul, this even goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier in this discussion, is I had a model from many, many years ago where I had to manually update ranges and data sets to make sure that I didn't make a goof and give an outdated presentation in front of a client, which of course I did. And so I was like, well, hold on a second. If I don't have to worry about this being outdated, and I don't have to make a checklist of, I need to change these things around, that's really a game changer. And so what I've been doing over these last handful of years is, it's just always use cases of how can I take something that I'm currently doing or that I've been doing for years and make it cleaner, easier, more efficient, and ideally, best of all, foolproof. Not just foolproof for me, but foolproof for anybody that I'm ever handing this off to. And so I asked myself, I said, is there a way that I can start using dynamic arrays in cash flow modeling so that every week that goes by, say in a distressed company where I'm spending, a couple hours a week updating it, could I get that down to 10 minutes? And so I started to put together some admittedly fairly robust and complex formulas to say, could I just simply copy and paste this forward and everything automatically updates? It took me some time to get it right, but eventually I did. And I figure out ways to put together a robust, dynamic array-driven weekly cash flow model that quite literally you could update in a couple of minutes instead of hours.
It's amazing when you tap into those type of things, whether it's dynamic arrays, whether it's Power Query, whatever it might be, when you start to figure out, wow, I can take this from 3 hours to 15 minutes. It's pretty amazing. And dynamic arrays.
It's incredible. Yeah. And I think what makes it neat too, and I know that you and I perhaps share some similar brain functionality in that, I think there also becomes this thirst and this curiosity of, well, what else can this do? What else would I be able to do here? And so it's not just like a problem solving of, I have an issue, how do I solve it? It's, I have a challenge, how do I make this better? And I think that that's just always this thirst of, there's always something that you can do to get it better. It's just a question of what that is and having the time to figure it out.
Yeah, and I'll share kind of a funny story I think you'll appreciate. I don't think I've ever shared this one, at least on the show before, but about 5 years ago now, when dynamic arrays had first come out. It's weird to think it's that long ago. I was playing with them and think it's kind of cool, and I decided to build this sensitivity thing we were doing that was fully dynamic and was showing it off to my boss. Of course, it totally broke and stopped working because I didn't think about some of the different things. And for me, it was my moment to show off, and he's just looking at me like, we had a really good relationship, so it didn't damage it. And he knew I'd been trying some new things, but I was like, all right, don't do that next time.
Well, that's important to think about. And I would say to anybody who's listening to this is, you have to come up with that appropriate balance of, we know that this works over here. It might not be the most robust, most efficient, but we know that it works.
Yep.
And we could take it a step further and do something that's a little bit more, beta. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But I think that it takes a lot of self-awareness and environmental awareness to say, all right, if we have this, is this good enough for now? Or do we need to really push this further? I had a call maybe about 3-4 weeks ago with someone, senior, very senior financial director at a consulting firm. And he was like, Carl, I don't want fancy stuff. I need to be able to audit this. And I have a lot of young staff who are like getting really into these dynamic array, whatever you call those formulas. He's like, I need to be able to audit. And so again, you got to understand who you are, who your boss is, what environment you're in. And even though you and I might say, let's push for something a little bit more robust and efficient, you might have somebody who says, I don't want that. I want something that's cleaner, easier for me to follow.
Yeah. And I've had times where I've had to go the other route, where I've had to come up with really complex formulas to make it super simple for them to do something because they can't build any of the formulas themselves. They can't update
Well, there's that
it.
too. Yeah.
And I've had to do that before where it's like, okay, you basically just got to do this. It's like, I could have done this in 30 minutes if you had the knowledge. Instead, I spent 6 hours so you can do this. And I hope it doesn't break because then I know I'll have to rebuild it.
Right. That's true too.
So I think there's the two extremes, and you have to know when to use them. I mean, we always say keep it simple, and that's the goal. But there's different levels of simple and complex.
For sure.
All right, we're going to move into a little bit more of kind of our standard. We have some fun question section. First one, favorite Excel shortcut?
Like a keyboard shortcut?
Whatever kind of shortcut you want. Usually people go with keyboard. But if you have
I feel like every time I get this question, my answer changes. I'm looking at my keyboard. I might just say F4. So cycling between relative and absolute and mixed references instead of having to put my mouse cursor and type in a $sign. Just quick and easy.
Yeah, that's one we get quite a bit. That is a favorite. All right. What's the most unique, funniest, fun thing you've built in your personal life in Excel?
So a number of years ago, I've always had this curiosity, and I decided to put it into a model, was a doggy daycare. So I've had dogs my whole life, and with our dog, we sometimes have to take him to daycare and boarding. And years ago, I was like, I don't understand what the revenue model is for these places. And so I was just like, I want to see what this is. And so I went around to a bunch of doggy daycares, and I grabbed like brochures, and even in the one we go to, there's like a flat screen TV that shows like all the different rates for like boarding, daycare, bathing, grooming, training, whatever it is. And so I started to like write down all of these data points. All these people probably thought that I was a spy from a competitor. And if they had known, I'm like, no, I'm just putting this into an Excel model. Just want to see how you make money here.
I'm just a nerd. Don't pay attention.
Yep, just a nerd. This is just what I do in my spare time for fun. So I did that. I created a financial model based upon a doggy daycare. And what I came to realize was that the small doggy daycares that are just really small kind of backyard places can't make much money at all. But the ones that really are, they've got all the machinery in place. They are big venue, or I shouldn't say venue, big facilities.
Sure.
Those places can do very, very well. A lot of this is a volume play. It's not anything more than that.
Interesting. Yeah, I think there's a lot of industries where it's become a volume play. But that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that because I'm not a dog person, and so I've never really thought of the economics of a doggy daycare. But it makes sense. You still have the model?
It's probably somewhere. I have no idea where it would be, but I'm sure. I'm sure that's with lots of people. It's like I know I built that somewhere. It's somewhere on my hard drive or on my flash drive, and I know that it's there because I never deleted it. I have not opened it.
I'm hoping that resurfaces one day on LinkedIn.
Maybe. Or you talk to me in like 10 years. You'd be like, what's new with you, Carl? I'm like, that doggy daycare model? I actually decided to open one.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I go for volume. I bought a big one.
And I go for volume. I have 600 dogs. And you're like, well, what's the quality of that? I'm like, not very good.
Quality. Who needs it? Oh, wait, did I say that? All right. So we're going to move into our rapid fire section here. How this works, you get no more than 10 seconds to answer each question. You have to take one side or the other. Then at the end, you can elaborate on one or two that you're like, but there's all this nuance. It'll work for you?
Okay. All right, we'll try that.
Here we go. Yeah, it's hard sometimes, especially if you've been a consultant. I get it. Circular references, yes or no?
No.
VBA, yes or no?
No.
Do you prefer a horizontal or vertical model?
Horizontal.
Excel dynamic arrays, yes or no?
Yes.
Fully dynamic models, yes or no?
No.
External workbook links, yes or no?
No.
Okay, good. I don't have to throw you off the show.
That was easier than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, I'm not done yet. I got a few more.
Oh, okay.
I just had to respond to the workbook links. Just that one.
Yes.
Almost nobody says yes. Should financial modelers learn Python in Excel?
I'm not going to say it depends. I'm going to say no.
Okay. Should financial modelers learn Power Query?
Yes.
Should they learn Power BI?
No.
Okay. Named ranges in your model, yes or no?
Yes.
Do you follow a formal standards board like FAST or SMART when building your models? Okay.
No.
Will Excel ever die?
Not in my lifetime.
That's a common answer. Will AI build the models for us in the future?
One day, yes.
Should you use sheet cell protection in your model? Yes or no?
Generally, no.
Okay. Do you believe financial models are the number one corporate decision-making tool?
No.
Then what is?
Discussions.
Okay. And what is your lookup function of choice?
Index X match.
All right. That wasn't too painful, was it?
No, it wasn't. But I want to have an hour now to explain my answers.
All right. Well, go ahead and elaborate on one or two that you're most passionate about.
Oh my goodness. So a lot of those were very great questions, and you could probably sense my hesitation in some of these answers, because I think that, when I think about financial modeling, I think about the who. I think about, who's building it and who is it for. And if you and I were building something for each other, I think my answers would have been very different versus if I am going into generic company and working with average person. So, is Python great? Yeah, it can for certain use cases. Power Query, yeah, for certain use cases. Named ranges for certain use cases. So I think all of my answers could have been yes in certain circumstances. But I think just generically across the board, if you were to say, Carl, I'm going to blindfold you, I'm going to put you into a random company with random people, what would your answers be? The answers I gave to you would have been my answers.
I totally get it. And I could tell you struggled with a few, and that's normal. And you'll appreciate this. I recently commented, somebody says you need to get people that have different answers that were very strong on one answer or another on a show. So I answered a bunch of former guests who wanted to come on, and I got about 15 of them that, oh yeah, I'll come debate. Now I'm like, okay, how do I split that out into a group and find the questions where they disagree? And we're going to do, I called it whose line is it anyway style, where the points will be made up and I just get to be the dictator on who won.
Yeah. Well, you're probably in the best position.
We're going to have a little battle with everybody on these different ones and make them take whatever side they took. They have to argue that. And between the audience and myself, we'll decide who the winner is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's really hard because, again, you told me I couldn't say it depends, but it almost always depends. And you could have two extremely strong arguments on polar opposite sides of that question.
Totally agree. But if you say it depends to everyone, does that make for good listening?
No, that just makes somebody who seems that they're very disagreeable. But that's how I sometimes have to come across, because I don't want people to think in terms of recipes.
I was going to make a comment, but I won't. All right. If you could share one piece of advice with our audience to be a better financial modeler, what would it be?
Put in the reps. I say to people all the time, I said this yesterday to a group, I was like, look, I'm no smarter than you. I just have put in a lot more reps than you have. And if you practice, if you put in the reps, if you grab a bunch of fake data, if you do, the model that you have, but come up with new, creative, innovative ways of doing it, those all count. That's all practice. That's all self-training. Those are all reps. So to anybody who wants to get better, yeah, you can learn Excel and Google Sheets inside and out. That's wonderful. But you got to put in the practice. You got to come up with that creativity and come up with new ways of going about your work. You're not going to learn as much from me or you, Paul, as you would just from yourself and experimenting.
A lot of truth to that. Be willing to just roll up your sleeves and try something. It may end up terrible. It probably will the first few times. It's like content creation. As I tell people, just go ahead and give it a try. It will probably suck. The good news is nobody will be reading it when you start. You'll get better over time.
Except with the model, hopefully somebody will be looking at it.
Yes. Don't turn the terrible model to your boss.
Yeah. But no, I agree with you. It's like, rather than come to, prime time, put your model in front of a client, make your mistakes, practice on the back end, come up with what makes sense when you're in your office at your desk, and then you come up with the best solution you've arrived at when it's ready for prime time.
Totally agree. Can you share a little bit about the services you offer, maybe some of the trainings and just anything you want to share about your business and what you do?
Yeah, so if you'd like to follow what I do, you can follow me at SeidmanFinancial.com. Also, like Paul, fairly active on LinkedIn. You're welcome to follow me there, where I know we both share a lot of tips, tricks, techniques, content all the time. I do a lot of different training, development, learning experiences. I have more than a dozen different learning experiences across financial and business modeling, one actually starting tomorrow. FP&A, cash flow modeling, Excel, fractional CFO services. And then I also work with companies on a advisory basis helping them get to the next level of their chapter of their business. So helping controllers, FP&A professionals, and CFOs get to where they want to go.
And so when do you sleep again, Carl?
Never.
I know, see, 2 young twins, tons of
young
courses.
twins, travel a lot, work all the time. It's been a very, very busy 6 months, but I like it. It's fun, and I wouldn't rather be doing anything else.
And that's great. I love that you love it. I mean, I love what I do, and that's really important, especially if you have to work a lot. Last thing you want is something you hate doing, and then add
That's right.
the travel and everything on top of it. You just become a miserable person pretty quickly. At least I do.
That's right. And I think that's true of financial modeling too. Do the things you love to do. Incorporate the approaches you love. When it's less frustrating to do your work, it becomes something that you're a lot more passionate and enthusiastic about.
Yeah, I tried basketball, but I didn't have the height, the skills, or the dribbling, so I gave that up.
I tried donuts. I just didn't have the stamina.
Yeah, I get it. All right. Well, thank you for joining me, Carl. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I hope our audience enjoys it as much as I enjoyed chatting with you, despite a few inside jokes and a little bit of humor here and there. It was a lot of fun.
Likewise, Paul. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks. Financial Modeler's Corner was brought to you by the Financial Modeling Institute. This year, I completed the Advanced Financial Modeler certification, and it made me a better financial modeler. What are you waiting for? Visit FMI at www.fminstitute.com/podcast and use code podcast to save 15% when you enroll in one of the accreditations today.